Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Friday, March 7th, 2025, and today we're going to talk dry farming in dry climates and big farming regrets, sorta, and it's Feedback Friday. So let's do it. All right, welcome to Friday, everyone. I had office stuff to do yesterday, and then I got the jerseys together for the soccer league. So there's not a whole lot to report there that's very interesting. I'm looking at a busy 10 days or so coming up with the forecast the way that it is. So maybe I should learn to enjoy these less intense days a little bit more. So yeah, it was quiet, and quiet is fine. Otherwise, it is Friday, which of course means Feedback Friday, where we look back at the week's topics and see what you all were saying. On Monday, we talked about things to keep in mind headed into the spring, and I like this from @JVIN248, who wrote, quote, "The absolute hardest to avoid planting too soon is all the YouTube videos from folks much further south than you showing off how they are planting or what is already up. Like I just saw a cornfield with corn up 3 inches. That was planted along the Texas Gulf Coast," end quote. Yeah, I mean, I have friends who are not that far from me who are already planting things that I know wouldn't do well if I planted them here right now. But they are, of course, closer to the coast and in a slightly warmer ag hardiness zone. So I know to hold off from experience, but it is hard when you're seeing all these other people doing things and you're like, should I be doing something? Probably not. I mean, there is no easy way to know or to determine how to and when to do something, but definitely don't follow the planting schedules directly of people who are not in your region or ag hardiness zone. If you're further north than I am, in a colder region, hold off for a bit on the early springs planting stuff that I'm doing. If you're in a warmer ag hardiness zone, well, you will have to get in a time machine and figure out what I'm doing in like a week or two to know what you should be doing now. Of the two, I envy your position the least. Also, I liked this from @Sable4980, who quotes me as saying, "It's the last chance to get stuff done, but also, keep in mind you also have time," and writes, quote, "Please elaborate. I have these same opposing thoughts," end quote. What they're referring to here is that I said March is your last chance to really get any like non-production stuff done, like tractor maintenance, before the farm erupts, but also you have time to get it done right. This is especially true because you will absolutely not have time to do it again later without foregoing something else you need to be doing. So whatever projects you're doing right now, just do them right. Take your time. And that especially goes for planting. Sometimes I rush plantings and all I had to do was take a little bit more time to make sure that bed was prepped well. Some of our military friends, like @ChrisMain7472 and others, have added the adage "slow is smooth and smooth is fast" as something they learned in the military. Chris elaborates, quote, "It's worthwhile to take the extra time to do things just right. Over time, the process will become muscle memory, and you will do it faster as you've learned how to do it slowly," end quote. That. On Tuesday, we broke down spring kale and got this question from Cat Funk's Fabulous Finds, 97045, who asks, quote, "Do you replant your kale each year?" end quote. Okay, so great question. Some of you may be like, yeah, duh, you have to because it's a biennial and it'll flower. But in warmer regions, certain varieties will effectively perennialize. There are varieties, various kales and collards that will basically just keep growing indefinitely depending on the weather and the culture. So most growers in my climate will indeed start kale every spring because we have to, and generally every fall. But I've seen collards and kale in Southern California that were taller than I am, and I am currently the tallest person in this office. Then on Wednesday, we talked about buying compost and also about megafauna. As you do. Lots of good nerdy comments on that, on the megafauna part, and I liked this from Angela Green 5144, who reminded us that, quote, "Fun fact, we still have 2 creatures considered megafauna here in North America, the moose and the bison. I have moose sometimes wandering through my fields, and oh my gosh, are they stupidly large. They're basically a Clydesdale with antlers. No bison yet, but it is a possibility that I am very close to a couple of parks and farms that have bison behind large fences," end quote. Indeed, still a few megafauna around there. Several interesting things came up with the compost discussion as well, like this from Bill Snyder 6945, who wrote, quote, "I found a source of alpaca manure I understand can be added directly without composting. As a backyard gardener with no organic rules to follow, do you see any issues with using this to amend and till into my clay soil to start new in ground beds. I also have compost that is mostly done. Is that a problem to till it in as well? End quote. And thanks, Bill. So no, finished compost is fine to work into the soil. By and large, like if the compost is done composting, it shouldn't be a problem in your soil. But as for the alpaca manure, I see a lot of references online to people saying alpaca manure is good to go on gardens, which isn't strictly true. All raw manure applications will take some time for their nutrients to become available to plants. Alpaca manure in particular is relatively low in nitrogen. So the risk of like burning crops like you would with like raw chicken manure is lower, but the risk of over applying potassium and phosphorus is still there. Also, if you're working it in, it's a little bit different than if you're just leaving it on the surface, because surface applications won't be nearly as plant available for a longer period of time. If it's worked into the soil, it could become more plant available quicker. But also think about in terms of zoologic pathogens, so that would be like those that can leap from an animal to a human. It's not the best idea to apply raw alpaca manure or any raw manure around crops you plan to eat anytime soon. The manure can contain human pathogens, so just be smart about it. As arbitrary as I find the 90-120 day rule, I think applying the manure well before you intend to eat anything from your garden space is generally a good idea for both nutrient availability to the crop and just general food safety, even if it's just for yourself. Then yesterday, I took a question from Patreon member Josh, who had requested more content on perennial fruit trees and canes. And I assumed Josh meant like canes like sugar canes and not like berries. But several commenters pointed out Josh likely meant fruit canes, which makes far more sense given the context of the question. It's possible I just wanted to explore sugar cane so much I refused to see what the question for what it was. Again, confirmation bias spares no one. That said, it is a little weird that we call them cane fruits and not briar fruits, or just, I don't know, berries, since they are not grasses. But there were a few people who expressed interest in some more info on sorghum and canes, so everyone wins. Also, it reminded me to order some lemongrass, which is like a mini cane, and also delicious. Anyway, more comments and questions than I can ever get to, as always, from you. But I appreciate your contributions. Best comment section on YouTube, as always, forever. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, dry farming, dry regions, BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by So Right Seeds. So Right Seeds is an heirloom seed company that offers fresh, high-quality, open-pollinated seeds. They have a great selection on their website of over 400 varieties, along with a planter's library with tips for growing. They offer cover crops and bulk packs of seed for sustainable home gardening. The instructions on the back of their packets have all the information you need to get started. Go to So Right Seeds, that's S-O-W, and use my discount code NOTILL for 15% off your order. That's SoRightSeeds.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by Peaceful Heritage Nursery. If you're looking for hardy and resilient fruit trees, berry plants, or pawpaw trees, then check out Peaceful Heritage Nursery. Peaceful Heritage Nursery LLC is a mail-order nursery shipping premium quality fruit trees and berry plants across the USA. They specialize in resilient, non-GMO plant genetics for small growers. Their diverse selection includes berries, cold hardy figs, passion fruits, gumi, mulberry, and much more. They're famous for their diverse selection of premium quality grafted pawpaw trees. 5-star Google ratings and customer testimonials attest to their commitment to excellence in quality and service. Find them at peacefulheritage.com and join the mailing list. Once again, find them at peacefulheritage.com. Use the promo code NOTILL for 10% off your first order. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Jesse Turretts, who writes, quote, "Dry farming. Hey, Farmer Jesse, a home gardener and aspiring farmer here in LA. Can you talk about your experience with dry farming? Would love to be able to apply some practices down here, but I'm uncertain where to start or if it can work in the San Fernando Valley, hot and windy. Thanks," end quote. All right, so great question. Would expect nothing less from a fellow Jesse. Also, I hope you all made it through the fires okay. I definitely was thinking of farming and gardening buddies out there a lot last month, and will be again this week with all the rain coming. That's just a tough start to this 2025 for you all, so our hearts are with you. Anyway, for anyone not familiar with that term, dry farming is when you grow food without irrigation, or at least without irrigation past establishment, meaning maybe you soak the soil in to get the plants like established in the ground, but then you do not irrigate after that. But generally, it means no irrigation at all, and also timing everything around the rains to ensure that you're utilizing the water that you do get. And although indigenous groups like the Hopi in that area have been doing some sort of dry farming in a climate at least similar to Southern California, so in their case like northern Arizona and surrounding areas, for many centuries with things like corn and sunflowers, their techniques are extensive, i.e. Use a lot of land, not always near their villages with mounds spaced several feet apart, but obviously they developed their techniques in corn varieties over many, many generations as well. I have this book from the 80s by history professor R. Douglas Hurt called Indian Agriculture in America, where he describes several of these dry farming techniques used by indigenous Americans and how the Hopi often used fields that are in floodplains or where natural flooding occurs to plant corn, often where rain runs over cliffs and spreads across fields, and they plant corn and other crops 12 to 18 inches deep in mounds 3 feet apart with a dozen or more seeds per hole that they later thin. So dry farming in a very hot, dry climate, historically speaking, does not look like your typical market garden does. Now, for us, we do dry farm some of our longer season produce here, but obviously dry farming for me here in Kentucky, where we get upwards of 50 inches of rain, in some years like 70 inches of rain, pretty slowly draining clay soil, that is significantly different from down there in Southern California, where you get a handful of inches of rain every year on very rapidly draining soil. So although there are some folks in the area and the region who do some amount of dry farming of vegetables, they almost certainly lose significant yield because obviously photosynthesis makes vegetables and photosynthesis requires water. However, I obviously want to encourage folks in dry regions to develop their own techniques to reduce and potentially eliminate water usage, because water is scarce there and not to mention expensive. So if it were me in your position, I would really work on my soil's ability, water holding capacity by bringing in compost, utilizing cover crops where possible to build the soil organic matter, shade from trees, mulches, locally adapted seeds, basically doing all of the living soil techniques that you possibly can. I would use water, especially in the early days of the garden, but I would also do what I could to retain the water that I do use either in plant form, so like crops or cover crops, or just under mulches. Again, moisture is an essential part of photosynthesis, and without it, crops cannot grow. So perhaps if you're following the other guidance, watering the crops in at planting and just as needed could reduce your water usage tremendously. As I always say about tillage, don't be dogmatic about it. Same thing applies to water. Do what the soil and the plants need. Then over time, perhaps you are able to develop the soil in a way that builds soil organic matter, which will itself hold water better for you. Of course, I'm talking more about like annual vegetables here. Dry farming perennials in that same climate is a little easier and slightly different matter. Annual vegetables are just complicated by the shallower root systems and time frame and susceptibility to heat and moisture swings. There are a handful of examples out there of dry farming folks in your area, and probably several I don't know about, but in general, you will need water. Either water preserved from the winter through good soil management, or water you add thoughtfully through irrigation. Space too. Giving stuff ample space decreases competition between plants. In our dry farmed areas, they are planted much less intensively. Like when we dry farm field tomatoes, which is all of our field tomatoes, we plant them closer to 3 feet apart in the row or more. In the tunnel, it's like 1 foot to 18 inches. But I'm going to say a productive vegetable garden will probably require a combination of all of the above: soil management, water, and good spacing to successfully dry farm it. Anyway, I hope that's at least a little bit helpful. Otherwise, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, mistakes. Be right back.
It took some time to decide what words to rhyme, and it feels so fine. Now it blows my mind.
Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Harnwah Greenhouses. Harnwah Greenhouses has pioneered controlled environment agriculture since 1965, partnering with market gardeners and farmers across North America to deliver turnkey greenhouse solutions. Their unwavering mission is to support growers' success through innovation and expertise in design, manufacturing, and installation. Harnwah Greenhouses are engineered to withstand high wind and snow loads, providing optimal brightness, increased yields, rapid ROI, and long-lasting durability. With over 20,000 projects completed, they are more than a manufacturer. They are a trusted partner. Their structures foster sustainable, energy-efficient ecosystems that drive profitable, resilient agriculture. In 2025, Arnois is introducing a new low-tech, high-tunnel model starting at just $2 per square foot, offering open field growers an accessible entry into controlled environment agriculture. Learn more at arnois.com. That's HARNOIS.com. All right, back to the show.
All right, so I occasionally think about if I could do it all over again, knowing what I know now, what would I do differently in terms of becoming a farmer? I've discussed this in bits and pieces before on this show and elsewhere, and Mimi and I once answered the question of if I could do it all over again, would I still farm, for a segment a few months ago, which I will link in the show notes. But mistakes are regularly on my mind because I am regularly still dealing with them like 16 years later. So yeah, here are some things that I think have had long-term repercussions that maybe by talking about them here, I can help others avoid or at least be prepared for them. The first mistake I made, and I think Hannah feels this way about herself too, is that I wish I had spent another 2 years or so learning to farm on a different style of farm. This is a big one because the farm where we both learned to farm was amazing. Everything was dry farmed and we worked with all types of animals. What I didn't really learn was how to do intensive vegetable production with irrigation, which is basically what we ultimately ended up gearing our entire farm around. On that farm, we were doing a lot of row cropping and it was all dry farmed, nothing like what my farm looks like. I would have loved to have a year or two working with a system similar to the one that we use now. We were both just very eager to get our farm started, and that's fine, and it obviously worked out, but I think it made things a lot harder than need be for a much longer period of time than it would have been if we had just worked on another farm. It would have been easier. Remember, we've started like 4 farms and even started working on gardens on a 5th farm. That fell through before we could really get going. I would happily replace 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 of those farms on the resume with work on someone else's farm if I could have that experience instead. Also, capital. I wish we had just taken our time and raised more capital so we weren't scrambling to pay for stuff for those first few years. Farming is slow in cash flow and high in upfront and yearly capital. Having money enough to get everything you need and support yourself while you get going is crucial. Keeping a job and slowly building up the farm would have not hurt. I also wish I understood business management better and cared more about that side of things. And not just as the business grew, but before we even started. I wonder if I had sat down and really looked at what it means to run a business, if I wouldn't have just taken that startup capital and started a farm with another family or someone that did aspire to run a really successful business, like was really passionate about business. Romantic and cool as farms are, they are purely a business. And it took me way too long to appreciate that. We even had an opportunity to work with somebody else, so somebody similar to that, somebody who loved business, and probably we could have done something really great together. But it was really early on and we passed on that because somewhat naively, we just wanted to do our own thing. The business side has always been a struggle for me because I just find, I mean, it's a curse, but I just find nothing less inspiring than money. But I also recognize it's a necessity. So I would like to see the alternate reality where we find partners and start something more collaborative with people who love that side of things. Or maybe I just work for another farmer instead of owning a farm. Or if I was someone listening to this and I do aspire to run a big business and manage employees and geek out over the spreadsheets, maybe finding someone who loves the physical act of farming and team up with them. And that would be maybe the better approach. It's at least worth thinking about. When I look over all the quote unquote regrets I have, in fact, most of them deal with rushing it, with wanting a farm more than understanding what a farm is, rushing to become a farmer and own land and have a business before really investigating how best to do all that for my personality and skill set. But I did the whole quote unquote thing there with the word regret because I simultaneously don't technically regret any of it. I made things harder on myself for sure, but I learned a whole heck of a lot along the way. And now I get to share that with you all. So hopefully through this show, you can avoid some of the mistakes that I made or at least learn from them. It's like I've said before, the best coaches were not always the greatest players. Sometimes they were just good at seeing where they screwed up and at helping other people avoid those mistakes. Anyway, what, if anything, would you all do over again? Let us know, and then go and enjoy your weekend. Big games upcoming for, well, all of the teams I follow, really, and the NWSL starts next weekend, including and the SEC tournament and all sorts of stuff. I love this time of year. March Madness indeed. I'm going to wrap it up there. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No Till Growers for their support. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music. Awesome. Pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook or the Seed Farmer at no-tillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/no-tillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or sign up in the month of March, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to our weeklies. Have some joiners. Shayna and William Curry and Randall Duran, Alex and Oliver, Maina, Stacy Moorman, Bill King, Chris Yates, and Stephen Smith. What are they up to today? So this group is trekking across they're hiking the Appalachian Trail, and they're somewhere, I don't know, deep in North Carolina. And that's such a big group that they kind of have to split up. So they kind of have to split up their campgrounds, and they're all like pretty close to each other, but they're kind of out of earshot. And anyway, one in the morning, they stop, they set up their camps, and in the morning they wake up, and one of the groups, one of the small like 3 or 4 people, are missing. And so they kind of look around, all their stuff is there, and then they see a small trail of ironically trail mix, and it's just headed out into this brush, and so they kind of follow it and they push the brush aside, and on the other side of the brush is this just like hidden path, and it goes deep into the woods. So and of course, like a normal person, they don't like call the authorities or anything, they just follow the trail to try and find their friends, and that's where our story begins. So anyway, everyone have a great weekend. We will see you back here. I'll be back here, you'll be where you are on Monday. Yeah. Thanks for watching and/or listening. Bye.